two-state solution is threatened ever more each day, like a mirage in the desert, whereas in fact there is no credible alternative that can respond to the legitimate aspirations of both parties. Let us not forget that the best guarantee for the security of Israel, and you know how committed France is to that security, is a fair peace with the Palestinians via the creation of a viable and independent Palestinian state, and therefore through a two-state solution. In this context, President, the joint declaration from Paris recalls the fundamentals to which we are all subject, by which I mean the international framework for all future agreements, the borders of 1967, and the fundamental resolutions of this Security Council. The preservation of the two-state solution is also the objective of Resolution 2334, an important resolution that the continuing settlement policy had made urgent and necessary. The third objective of our initiative was to begin a positive, encouraging process, helping for negotiations to begin once again. To do this, we've committed, together with all the interested parties, to work deeply together to define positive incentives with all of our partners. I would in particular like to thank Sweden, Germany, Norway, and the European Commission for their very active commitment to this process. These incentives are based around three main areas. An economic area with the prospect of a special privileged partnership with the European Union, and also increasing participation of the private sector. That's absolutely essential. Capacity building at institutional and state level for the Palestinian Party. Also bringing together Israeli and Palestinian civil society to improve dialogue between the parties, an essential dialogue indeed, to revive public debate, and also to bring together two societies that have to live side by side. The objective of these incentives is to remind the parties how much interest they have in peace and how much the international community can and wishes to help them. President, the joint declaration of the conference on the January 15th is the result of a long period of work with lots of different people involved. I'd also like to hail the work of the Quartet, the Arab Peace Initiative, and also the initiatives launched by Russia and Egypt, and the essential role, of course, of the United States. There's been transparency towards all of the parties. It is essential that they, through specific action on the ground, show their commitment to the two-state solution. As has been stated time and again by the French authorities, it has never been, and it cannot be, a question of dictating the terms to the parties, those being the terms of the peace agreement. Only direct negotiations between Israel and Palestine can lead to peace. Nonetheless, the international community has an irreplaceable role to play. That is because through its guarantees and encouragement, it can help to create the appropriate framework and conditions for negotiations to start once again. That is the thinking behind the French initiative. That is the thinking behind the Paris conference, which is a friendly hand held out to the parties. In that context, the joint declaration of the 15th of January is, of course, not the end of the road. It is just a necessary step, an important step, towards beginning the peace process once again. The situation on the ground means that we must remain more than ever active in helping the parties move towards a settlement. The vile attack of the 8th of January that cost the lives of 4 Israeli soldiers, and that France also rapidly condemned, shows us the extent to which the situation on the ground remains precarious. And as the joint communiqué of Paris states, it is therefore essential that we demonstrate responsibility and vigilance, and that we avoid any unilateral action, because that would only further exacerbate the situation on the ground in Jerusalem and elsewhere. President, I repeat, we must remain active, bearing in mind a recommencement of negotiations, and that is why the participants in the Paris conference have committed to meet once again during this year to review the progress that is being made and to move forward. The objective is to re-establish a positive political dynamic founded on the two-state solution, which is the only way to respond to the legitimate aspirations of both parties and ensure that Palestinians and Israelis are able to live side by side in peace and security. We call for the unswerving commitment of all of our partners, in particular the members of the Security Council. This is so that together we can continue on this rocky road. President, colleagues, let us together take on the historic responsibility that falls to us in the service of peace in the Near East, in the Middle East. Thank you. I thank the representative of France, and I now give the floor to the representative of Senegal.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'd like to begin my statement by welcoming the holding of this public debate on the situation in the Middle East, including Palestine. I would also like to thank Mr. Nikolai Mladenov for his briefing, which reminds us that our meeting today is taking place in a very disturbing context, because the situation on the ground is still volatile. There is ongoing unacceptable building of settlements and violence, as well as a very difficult humanitarian situation, in particular in Gaza. But despite these obstacles, this past year was marked by the ongoing commitment of the international community for peace in the Middle East. In point of fact, we have the French initiative. The permanent representative of France has quite eloquently referred to that initiative just a moment ago. We have the efforts of stakeholders in the region, including Egypt and the Russian Federation, as well as the publication of the Quartet's report on the situation on the ground. And with that, the international community has shown that it continues to have faith in a two-state solution. The crowning achievement is that 8 years after the last action taken on this subject, the Security Council, which has regularly focused on intensified and accelerated building of settlements, adopted Resolution 2334 last December 2016. As we know, this resolution calls for a halt to the settlements, which are deemed illegal from the standpoint of international law, and reaffirms the two-state solution as the only way out, the only way for a positive and lasting outcome to the conflict. The same resolution also invites us to pursue and intensify diplomatic efforts to arrive at a settlement to this dispute, and that bears witness to our common commitment to peace in the Middle East. This peace has been threatened by considerable obstacles to which we are regularly alerted, primarily by the UN Secretary-General. Among the most disturbing obstacles, undoubtedly, is the ongoing accelerated building of settlements and the occupation of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, which, beyond dangerously imperiling the two-state solution, fuels and spurs on hatred and violence, affecting Palestinians as well as Israelis, two peoples who must coexist in peace and security, each within safe and internationally recognized borders. The most recent tragic illustration of this violence was the attack which took place in Jerusalem on the 8th of January. We condemn that attack and any acts of violence or terrorism, regardless of who the perpetrators are or what their motivations are. In order to overcome these obstacles to peace, Senegal, echoing the recommendations in the Quartet's report, urges the parties to put an end to the building of settlements as well as to related policies, but also to renounce violence and incitement to hatred. That is, in point of fact, the appeal in Resolution 2334, namely, in order to prevent acts of violence targeting civilians, as well as acts aimed at provocation and destruction or terrorist actions, requires that those responsible for such actions be brought to justice. Mr. President, as the Quartet's report reminds us, we must not ignore the dangers posed by the precarious situation in Gaza, in particular the catastrophic humanitarian situation, which affects 70% of some 2 million people living in that area. We have seen demonstrations in Gaza last Sunday as a result of the precarious level of basic social services, in particular electricity. I would like to welcome the recognition, at the request of some member states of our organization, of the humanitarian dimension in the occupied territories during the Council's briefings on the Middle East and on Palestine. We reiterate our appreciation to humanitarian actors, in particular the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Middle East, for their efforts for Palestinian refugees, and I invite member states to continue to provide assistance to that office. That office has, in point of fact, just launched an appeal for urgent aid in the amount of $813 million. Beyond provision of humanitarian aid, we must help restore the Palestinian economy, which is in a very difficult situation, primarily as a result of the occupation, but also as a result of reduced aid from international partners. On this point, I would welcome the fact that the French initiative provides for economic and political incentives to make the two-state solution more attractive and mutually beneficial for Israelis and Palestinians. The same is true for support needed by the Palestinian Authority in its strategy to build credible institutions and also to reaffirm the essential role of civil society. Mr. President, June 2017 will undoubtedly be a very sad anniversary. It will be 50 years since the occupation of Palestinian territory, but despite frustrations which may arise due to the lack of tangible progress in the political process and the difficult circumstances on the ground, these frustrations may lead to discouragement or even to cynicism. We have no other choice but to redouble our efforts and to be perseverant. We reiterate our appeal to Israelis and to Palestinians who, in truth, are the only ones who can give this sought-after peace a chance. We call on them to work to overcome their differences in order to arrive at a two-state solution on the basis of international law and relevant UN resolutions. Mr. President, in conclusion, I would address all of those, including Palestinians and Israelis, to say that we share your legitimate aspirations for peace and progress. And on behalf of Senegal, as the chairman of the UN Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People, that my country will continue to work with the remainder of the international community in calling for dialogue and solidarity in order to find a lasting solution to this dispute, which undoubtedly is deep-rooted, but it is not insurmountable. Thank you very much for your attention. I thank the representative of Senegal.
Italy. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, allow me to thank at the outset Mr. Mladenov for his briefing today and for his continuing efforts on this issue. Through him, I would like also to commend the essential work carried out by all relevant United Nations entities and staff, both at headquarters level and on the ground. The Paris conference, to which Italy took part at ministerial level, showed the cohesiveness of the international community in keeping the Middle East peace process high on our agenda, on the world agenda. It also confirmed a widely shared commitment to pursuing the goal of a just and lasting peace between Israel and Palestine, based on a two-state solution through direct negotiations. As indicated by the July 2016 Quartet Report and Security Council Resolution 2334, facts on the ground are threatening the viability of the two-state formula. Settlements, which have expanded considerably in the last year, as well as increased demolitions and confiscations of Palestinian projects in the occupied territory, including East Jerusalem, are dangerously impairing the viability of the two-state solution based on the 1967 lines. But settlements, of course, are not the only obstacle to peace. Let me underline in this regard Italy's deep concern over the risk of growing terrorist violence and incitement on the ground. The recent murderous attack in Jerusalem reminded us of the extreme fragility of the situation and that immediate steps are required to prevent those acts that must be condemned, as we did, by all the parties, including with active rejection of incitement. If not properly addressed and reversed, those facts on the ground may deepen the political stalemate and lead, both in Israel and in Palestine, as well as in the whole region, to growing risks of further hatred, intolerance, and violent extremism. The erosion of the two-state solution may leave room to a sort of dangerous one-state illusion, plagued by insecurity and continuous tension. This is not the end state that the international community has invested so many political and financial resources so far, nor it is what Israeli and Palestinian citizens deserve. So the parties, we think, must take substantial steps to demonstrate their genuine commitment to the reestablishment of a political horizon leading to the resumption of direct negotiations, which shall be the aim of every international effort, bearing in mind that peace cannot be imposed from the outside. We also believe that the impact of our endeavor will be measured by our capacity to bring the parties back to the negotiation table, to diffuse mistrust, to clearly highlight the many, many dividends of peace. In this vein, I wish to express our appreciation for the work put forward by the outgoing US administration in the pursuance of a just peace, and we are particularly appreciative of John Kerry's relentless efforts during his tenure as US Secretary of State. We are confident that the next US administration will invest the same political capital and deploy the same efforts for resolution of the conflict based on the two-state formula. Italy appreciates and further encourages the efforts of the Quartet, whose recommendations keep their full validity and also underscores the importance of the ongoing efforts to advance the Arab Peace Initiative. Despite some recent encouraging signals, Palestine national reconciliation remains unaccomplished. Let me here underline that the Palestinian reconciliation process is an important element for reaching the two-state solution. Mr. President, poverty, high unemployment rates, especially among the youth, a persisting stagnation of the economy, all indicators show that the daily life of Palestinians is characterized by countless emergencies. As Minister Alfano recently stated at this council, only by addressing the root causes of instability can we build peace for tomorrow. There are priorities for socio-economic development that are no more deferrable, such as, for example, access to water and energy resources. This underscores the urgency of dialogue and concrete cooperation in these fields between Israel, Palestine, and relevant neighboring countries, beside and above political considerations. The dire humanitarian situation in Gaza also must be concretely and effectively addressed. The reconstruction of the Strip, the improvement of the living condition of its people cannot wait any longer. In this Council, in another relevant fora, Italy is committed to playing its role to finally and fully put in practice the framework outlined in Oslo more than 20 years ago. There is considerable work to be done to rebuild this trust between the parties, including by the respective civil societies, to rehabilitate the vision of two states living side by side in peace and security. Before concluding, Mr. President, I also wish to mention another country that we consider crucial for regional stability, Lebanon. Italy welcomes the recent election of President Aoun and the formation of the government led by Prime Minister Hariri, which sees the clear objective to restore trust. In the light of our substantial contingent of peacekeepers within UNIFIL, we remain strongly committed to upholding stability in Lebanon, and we will work within the UN Security Council to ensure the broadest international support to the current positive cooperation between the Lebanese political forces. UNIFIL's strategic review also is a key opportunity to ensure the effectiveness of the mission, including its essential civilian and maritime components. Weakening them would create, we think, dangerous voids. In this respect, we hope that parliamentary election in 2017 will mark a significant step forward in strengthening Lebanese democracy and consolidating state institutions. All countries, and especially countries in the region, must shoulder their responsibilities in this regard. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Italy and now give the floor to the representative of Uruguay.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Le agradezco la organización de este debate. Al mismo tiempo agradezco al coordinador especial para el proceso de paz de Medio Oriente, el señor Nikolai Mladinov, por su presentación, reiterando una vez más el total apoyo de Uruguay a sus gestiones. Señor presidente, en 1947, la Asamblea General de nuestras Naciones Unidas, adoptó con el voto de Uruguay la resolución 181, que dispuso la participación de Palestina para crear un Estado árabe y uno judío. Uruguay votó convencido que esa decisión permitiría el establecimiento de dos estados, Israel y Palestina, que convivirían en paz y con fronteras seguras. La posición del Uruguay no ha cambiado desde entonces. En las 7 décadas transcurridas desde la adopción de la resolución 181, mientras que Israel se ha consolidado como un Estado pleno, moderno y miembro de esta organización, Palestina continúa enfrentando serias dificultades para su desarrollo e inserción internacional, lo que deriva en graves consecuencias para su población y en el incremento de tensiones en toda la región. Estamos sin duda ante un contexto de particular relevancia en este largo y sinuoso camino hacia la paz. La adopción de la resolución 2334 y la conferencia de paz que acaba de finalizar en Francia son dos claras muestras de la urgencia que la comunidad internacional asigna a la conclusión pacífica y exitosa de este proceso. Señor presidente, Uruguay reafirma, al igual que lo ha venido haciendo desde 1947, su apoyo indeclinable al derecho de Israel y de Palestina a vivir en paz, dentro de fronteras seguras y reconocidas, en un ámbito de cooperación renovado y libre de cualquier amenaza o acto que quebrante la paz. Asimismo, reitera su respaldo a la solución de dos estados independientes, convencido que es la única opción que permitirá la coexistencia pacífica de Israel y Palestina. Y en ese sentido, insta una vez más al reinicio de negociaciones directas entre ambos, camino esencial para lograr tal objetivo. Es sumamente importante que sus autoridades den claras señales políticas para salir del actual círculo vicioso de desentendimientos y enfrentamientos violentos entre las partes. Del mismo modo, es preciso que se abstengan de adoptar decisiones unilaterales que entorpezcan el diálogo y cumplan de buena fe con sus obligaciones en materia de derecho internacional y con las resoluciones de este Consejo. Asimismo, a la luz de algunos anuncios por parte de terceros países que son actores claves en este proceso, resulta esencial la calma y el análisis necesarios para evitar tomar medidas que puedan afectar gravemente el futuro de las negociaciones y de la solución de dos estados. La pasada semana, Uruguay expresó su enérgica condena al atentado terrorista perpetrado en Jerusalén el día 8 de enero, manifestando su solidaridad con las víctimas, sus familias y con Israel, reiterando una vez más su total repudio a este tipo de hechos que amenazan seriamente el proceso de paz en el Medio Oriente. Señor presidente, nos genera desconsuelo y dolor que la autoridad palestina no haya condenado públicamente este despreciable y cobarde atentado, y reiteramos que no debe haber espacio alguno para la incitación y la glorificación a la violencia. Y tampoco hay espacio, señor presidente, para un silencio cómplice. Uruguay da la bienvenida a todas las iniciativas que permitan avanzar en la búsqueda de soluciones en el proceso de paz de Medio Oriente, a fin de alcanzar una salida pacífica, justa, negociada, duradera y que conforme al derecho internacional contemple las aspiraciones legítimas de ambas partes. En ese marco, el pasado domingo Uruguay fue uno de los países firmantes de la Declaración de París. Permítaseme ahora, señor presidente, hacer una breve mención al conflicto en Siria. Tras diversas iniciativas que fracasaron en 2016 para lograr un cese de la violencia, el año finalizó con la adopción de 2 resoluciones que permiten vislumbrar algo de esperanza para el pueblo sirio. Si bien estos avances resultan alentadores, queda aún un largo camino por recorrer para poder finalizar, luego de 6 años, este horrendo conflicto. Reconocemos el importante paso alcanzado al adoptar por unanimidad la resolución 2328, la cual luego de varios intentos permitió contemplar la situación humanitaria en Alepo y monitorear la evacuación de sus habitantes. Asimismo, nos congratulamos por la adopción, el último día del año, de la resolución 2336 y resaltamos los esfuerzos realizados por Rusia y Turquía y las oportunidades que ellas presentan para la búsqueda a una solución a este conflicto. Uruguay reafirma su apoyo al enviado especial del secretario general, Staffan de Mistura, al tiempo que reitera su confianza en que las negociaciones que se realizarán en Astana y Ginebra logren resultados inmediatos y efectivos. Tenemos la certeza que el nuevo secretario general continuará trabajando incansablemente para lograr la paz en Siria. A lo largo de los debates abiertos sobre Medio Oriente a los que Uruguay ha participado, se ha expresado la necesidad imperiosa de proteger a los civiles y permitirles que se
protect civilians and provide humanitarian aid and basic attention urgently to people so that they can survive these chaotic circumstances, in particular the most vulnerable people who are caught up in this conflict. We must not forget that the situation in Yemen, Iraq, and other countries of the region is also equally dire. Thank you. I thank the representative of Uruguay for his statement.
Now to the representative of Russian Federation.
Thank you, President. The Middle East and Northern Africa region is still in a systemic, multi-level crisis. There have been ongoing bloodthirsty terrorist attacks and other attacks, including the murder of the Russian ambassador in Ankara, Mr. Karlov. There have been explosions in Turkey and Egypt, the tragedy in Berlin and Jerusalem. These are all evidence that the terrorist threat is global. This once again shows us the need for a consolidated efforts from the international community to form a broad anti-terrorist front. This has been called for time and again by the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Furthermore, there is a need for measures for a political settlement in a number of conflicts and also for the re-establishment of stability and peaceful life in the region of the Middle East and Northern Africa. President, the situation in the Palestinian-Israeli aspect of the Middle Eastern settlement remains tense and explosive. This is demonstrated by the periodic spikes in violence, including the terrorist attack in Jerusalem on the 8th of January. This killed 4 Israeli soldiers, and also in the number of arrests of Palestinians and violations of the ceasefire regime around Gaza. The Russian position on the Middle Eastern settlement was and remains fundamental and consistent. We advocate a comprehensive, fair and stable settlement on the basis of the corresponding UN Security Council resolutions, the Madrid Principles, including peace in exchange for territory, land for peace, and also Arab Peace Initiative. We are confident that the long-term solution to the conflict should be found through the course of direct negotiations between the parties of the conflict without any preconditions. The general position position of the international community has been stated repeatedly, and based on that, we voted for Security Resolution 2234. We believe that this is a consolidated signal that unilateral efforts are unacceptable, both by Israel or by the Palestinians. It's also unacceptable to second-guess the conclusions of peace negotiations, and it is important to maintain the prospect of a two-state solution. In this context, we note that the concluding statement of the International Ministerial Conference on the Palestinian-Israeli settlement in Paris rightly reproduced the main provisions of the existing international legal basis for conflict settlement, and also included encouragement to the parties of the conflict to restate their commitment to a two-state solution. At the same time, we remain convinced that today, as never before, the time has come for practical measures to be taken to bring the peace process out of its dangerous impasse. With this in mind, we continue to make efforts to renew direct political dialogue between the Palestinians and the Israelis. We restate our readiness to offer Moscow as a forum for this contact. I remind you that this meeting was supposed to take place in November last year, and the Palestinian Party was ready for that. Another priority for our work was and remains facilitating intra-Palestinian reconciliation. In Moscow, there has just been a high-level meeting of representatives of all of the main Palestinian groups. We note the key importance of re-establishing political and geographical unity of Palestine on the basis of the political platforms of the PLO and the Arab Peace Initiative. If we manage to solve the intra-Palestinian conflict, then we have the preconditions for the Palestinian people to exercise their legal right to an independent and viable state existing in peace and security with its neighbors. Effective overcoming of the inter-Palestinian discourse will also enable us to ease the situation in Gaza. There, humanitarian and socio-economic situations remain very difficult. There's a difficult humanitarian situation, and thus the Palestinians are increasingly reliant on the help of the international community. Therefore, we hail the work done by the UN agencies, in particular UNRWA, in this area. The Russian Federation, for its part, took a decision in November on earmarking for 2017 to 2021 a voluntary contribution to the UNRWA budget of $2 million. President, on settling crises in Syria, Iraq, Libya, and Yemen, Russia has unswervingly advocated the fact there is no alternative to a political and diplomatic process based on inclusive national dialogue. We continue to make efforts to support the political process for resolving the conflict in Syria, while expanding humanitarian access and the fight against terrorism, as is stipulated in UN Security Council Resolution 2254, and the corresponding decisions of the International Syria Support Group. We are satisfied that on the 29th of December, an agreement was signed on a ceasefire between the Syrian government and the main squads of the armed opposition. This took place under the aegis of Russia and Turkey. Naturally, of course, the terrorists of ISIL and al-Nusra were excluded from this agreement. As a result of the ceasefire, we have also seen the ceasefire encouraged over most of the territory. President, Syria, there are high hopes of the 23rd of January Astana international meeting on the Syrian settlement. Now the preparation for that is ongoing. It is expected that this event will include representatives of the government of Syria and also the armed opposition groups who signed the agreement on the ceasefire and who support a political solution. We plan this meeting as a specific step for the implementation of Resolution 2236, which approves the December documents. The meeting in the Kazakh capital is a kind of bridge towards the inclusive Geneva negotiations planned by the Special Envoy to the Secretary-General Stefan de Mistura for the 8th of February. We think that this kind of event can revive the abandoned intra-Syrian dialogue. The format in Astana also stipulates the invitation of representatives of the UN who may moderate between the Syrian parties. On the whole, the outside participants, as we understand it, should be determined by the character of the objectives that are set. An important role as hosts falls to our Kazakh colleagues. The inclusion of forces that have an influence on the ground is aimed at creating beneficial conditions for consolidating the ceasefire. This subject will be at the heart of discussions. Having said that, it is likely that a range of other important aspects will also be discussed, such as trust-building measures, improvement of humanitarian access, and elements of the political agenda. Currently, the organization work is ongoing. We hope that international and regional partners will support these efforts. New opportunities are opening up, and these must be used at all costs. We hope that the forthcoming meeting on Syria in Astana will allow us to strengthen the ceasefire and also will give a powerful impetus to the process of political settlement under the aegis of the United Nations. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation, and I now give the floor to the representative of Ethiopia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would like to thank Mr. Mladinov for his comprehensive briefing, which was very useful. It is self-evident that the peace and stability of the Middle East region has broader implications for the maintenance of international and regional peace and security. For Africa, for the Horn of Africa in particular, developments in the region have significant meaning for our peace and security because of our close proximity. The growing threats of terrorism and violent extremism and the possibility of ISIL, Daesh, and Al-Qaeda establishing links with Al-Shabaab is no longer a matter of speculation. It's real. The recent geopolitical shift in the Middle East and the Red Sea region have also dramatically changed the security dynamics, further complicating the peace and stability of our region. Let me underline here, we condemn most vehemently the terrorist attack that took place in Jerusalem a few days ago. We understand fully the challenge Israel is facing in this regard. Mr. President, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been one of those disputes at the core of the dangerous situation which essentially defined the Middle East region for the past several decades. The situation has been further compounded by recent conflicts plaguing other countries of the region. The collapse of state institutions, the growing influence of terrorists, and the escalation of sectarian violence is threatening to unravel the whole region. It will not be too much of an exaggeration to say that the fallout from the crisis in the Middle East will have huge impact on our region. That is partly why we support the peaceful resolution of the conflict in the Middle East, most particularly the long-standing Israeli-Palestinian dispute. As a friendly country to both Israel and Palestine, Ethiopia is very much concerned with the lack of progress in the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. It's not only that there has not been much progress towards the resolution of the crisis, but even more worryingly, it doesn't seem there is a real possibility for making progress in the future, progress toward the only viable option for durable peace, which is a two-state solution. But one hopes it's still possible to make progress and that not everything is lost. Positive developments such as the signing of the agreement 2 days ago to renew the activity of the Israeli-Palestinian Joint Water Committee might give us reason for not losing hope. Mr. President, Ethiopia's position on the Israeli-Palestinian dispute has always been clear. As much as we support the right of Israel to exist in peace and security, we also support the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination and the right of Palestine to exist as a free and independent state. Given our so many problems in Africa and in the Horn of Africa in particular, we may need to tread carefully lest we appear to be pontificating on how peace can be achieved in the Middle East. But we take this Council and the United Nations seriously. We feel being a member of the Council carries with it an obligation to the Charter and to an institution which came out of the Second World War, an historical fact which, for a variety of reasons, can sometimes be overlooked, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. But still, given the political realities, we realize it's not the Security Council that can resolve the Israel-Palestine conflict. It is only the two parties that can achieve peace and resolve the conflict. But the Council cannot be a mere spectator, which would amount to an abdication of responsibility. It can and must nudge, prod, and encourage the two parties to make sure that the two-state solution would remain viable and peace is secure, justice is done, and the security of countries is protected. The former Secretary General said in his last speech to this Council, and I quote, "The right of the Jewish people to have a state does not negate the right of the Palestine people to statehood." End of quotation. Accordingly, Ethiopia fully supports the goal of two states living side by side in peace and security as the only viable option to resolving the Israeli-Palestinian dispute. We believe this not only in the best interest of both Israel and Palestine, but it will also significantly advance peace and security in the Middle East region. Mr. President, we all know that many initiatives have been made to facilitate negotiation between the Israelis and the Palestinians with a view to achieving a comprehensive, just, and lasting resolution. We are meeting just 2 days after the Paris Conference for Peace in the Middle East, which we appreciate and which was aimed at creating a political momentum conducive to new negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians themselves. Unfortunately, peace has so far remained elusive to the detriment of Israelis and Palestinians, as well as to the peace and stability of the Middle East region. Actions from both sides, which run counter to the achievement of a negotiated peace, are not only increasing frustration and mistrust, but also undermining the very viability of the two-state solution. At a time when terrorists are expanding their influence in the region and sectarian violence is on the rise, the absence of any meaningful progress will be a recipe for disaster, increasing more radicalization, which creates favorable conditions for extremists to thrive. Therefore, it is imperative that the two sides resume direct and meaningful negotiation to achieve a comprehensive, just, and lasting solution on the basis of mutual trust and a spirit of compromise, which ensures Israeli security and Palestinian aspirations for statehood. This is what the situation calls for, and it's also in the best interest of the two parties as well as the international community as a whole. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Ethiopia and now give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you also to Special Coordinator Mladinov for his briefings. I would like to begin by welcoming the adoption of Resolution 2334 last December. With the two-state solution immediately in jeopardy, it was important for the Security Council to demonstrate a clear commitment to a just, lasting, and comprehensive peace. The resolution demands that Israel cease settlement activities. It also calls for immediate steps to prevent violence against civilians and calls for collective efforts to launch negotiations. I would like to stress that the resolution must be taken as a whole. The cessation of settlement activities will not bring about peace on its own, and all other efforts must also contribute to the relaunch of political dialogue. Japan calls upon the relevant parties to show commitment to this resolution. Mr. President, little progress has been seen in the Middle East peace process, and future prospects are dim. Japan rejects all acts, incitement, and glorification of violence. Terrorist attacks, such as the vehicular attack on the 8th of January, cannot be justified for any reason, and Japan firmly condemns such acts of terrorism. At the same time, disproportionate use of force by Israel is also a concern. Persistent violence leads people from both sides to lose faith in a two-state solution. Japan reiterates its firm position that settlement activities are in violation of international law and Israel must immediately freeze such activities. Japan has on various occasions urged Israel to reconsider its policy. Nevertheless, house demolition continues in 2017, with over 70 buildings destroyed in the first week of January alone. These activities physically erode a two-state solution. Unity among Palestinians is also more important. Preparations is underway for the first session of the Palestinian National Council in 20 years. Japan hopes that the Council will be inclusive, promote unity, and bolster the efforts to achieve a two-state solution. In Gaza, the humanitarian situation is dire. People suffer from severe lack of electricity, water, and places to live. These hopeless conditions are ruining peace efforts, feeding radicalism, and do not benefit either side. Assistance from the United Nations and other humanitarian institutions is vital, and their political space must be maintained. Furthermore, we call for the easing and eventual lifting of the Gaza blockade, while duly taking security concerns into account. Mr. President, given these impediments to the peace process, what can we do? Japan is undertaking a three-part approach: political dialogue, confidence building, and economic assistance to the Palestinians. Japan believes that dialogue is the only way to achieve peace and calls upon both parties to resume direct negotiations. Japan appreciates the various initiatives undertaken by the relevant parties. We welcome the joint communiqué issued at the ministerial conference hosted by France on January the 15th, underscoring international support for a negotiated solution with two-state living side by side in peace and security. State Minister Sonora attended the meeting from Japan, outlining our efforts so far in this statement. Japan also welcomes the powerful call by United States Secretary of State Kerry for Israel and Palestine to make the difficult choice for peace. The determination shown by the new Secretary General at the opening debate last week to actively engage in mediation and peacemaking is a hopeful sign. Turning to economic assistance, Jericho Agro-Industrial Park, JIPE, which Japan has promoted for the past 10 years, together with Palestine, Israel, and Jordan, will increasingly contribute to the Palestinian economy and trust building in the region. We must also remember the importance of investing in future generations. Last November, Japan initiated a technical assistance program to revise math and science texts and curricula in Palestine. This augments our previous assistance to build schools and underlines our commitment to future generations. On confidence building, Japan promotes regional cooperation on the agricultural sector with Israel, Jordan, and Palestine, which enhances mutual trust as well as the development of agriculture in Palestine. At grassroots level, we invited 10 future leaders of Israel and Palestine to Japan last month as part of the program we have been running for 20 years. Participants spent time together familiarizing themselves with the history of Japan's post-war reconciliation and development while exchanging views and developing mutual understanding amongst participants. One participant from Palestine commented that it was the first time he had an opportunity to talk to Israelis other than soldiers. I firmly believe that peaceful environment enables such exchange of views and mutual understanding. Recently, I heard from Mr. Pierre Graham-Bull, the Commissioner General of UNRWA, that young people in Gaza have extremely limited opportunity to exit Gaza and much less to interact with Israelis. And I recognize the importance of continuing this program. Mr. President, in concluding, Japan reiterates that peace is only achieved through direct negotiations between the parties. I urge both sides to make decision for peace. Alongside support for political dialogue, Japan, for its part, will continue to promote confidence building that enables such dialogue and offer economic assistance that keeps a two-state solution viable. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the representative of Japan for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Special Coordinator Mladenov, for briefing the Council today, and thank you and your office for your tireless efforts to keep the Council informed while working with all sides. Let me begin by reiterating in the strongest possible terms the United States' condemnation of the horrific vehicular attack on January 8th by a terrorist in Jerusalem. We extend our deepest condolences to the families of the 4 Israeli soldiers who were killed, including U.S. citizen Erez Orbach, and we hope for a full and fast recovery of those injured. The United States and the Security Council both issued statements condemning the attack. There is absolutely no justification for such brutal and senseless attacks. Moreover, we cannot allow attacks like these to deter achieving lasting and durable peace in the Middle East. UN Security Council Resolution 2334 very clearly addressed the need to prevent acts of terror and to condemn them, observe calm, exercise restraint, and refrain from incitement and inflammatory rhetoric. As we all know, the viability of a two-state solution is increasingly at risk. We have called for both sides to take significant steps on the ground to reverse current negative trends and to send a clear message that they are prepared to fundamentally change the equation without waiting for the other side to act. We have repeatedly and emphatically stressed to the Palestinians that all incitement to violence must stop and that all acts of terror must be condemned. Our position regarding settlement activity has also been clear. Meanwhile, we have strongly opposed unilateral efforts to delegitimize Israel in international fora. Unfortunately, trends continue to move in the wrong direction. We must all work together to reverse these trends. As reaffirmed by the participants at the French ministerial over the weekend, the international community stands ready to help the parties realize a two-state